Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. Welcome to today's session on understanding the social footprint of central banking and monetary policy in Pakistan, hosted under SDPI's 24th Sustainable Development Conference. Today's topic is getting serious attention globally and has become even more relevant for Pakistan as the debate broadens beyond the fiscal policy to integrate monetary policy into the broader development agenda. The idea today is to convey to the citizenry, to convey our message across the board. So please be as comfortable, as easy as you can be. Let me just put in two housekeeping rules. Number one, please stick to your allotted time, which you all know what that is. And please keep your mics muted as we go through the program till you come to your session. Let me introduce the first speaker, Dr. Hippler, the country director of FES. Dr. Hippler is a specialist on the Middle East and the Central Asian politics. Dr. Hippler, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Just a very few words of greeting of this important conference. Friedrich Ebert Foundation is a German foundation. We have been in Pakistan since 1990 with an office in Islamabad. And we have been working in three areas. The first one is about governance and democratization. The second one is about economic and social justice. And what we are doing to do today is obviously located here. The third one is about regional peace and stability, something that is a little bit weaker now with the relationships between India and Pakistan and Afghanistan a little bit complicated. So I was very excited that we could link up with SDPI and especially with Dr. Sajid in regard with this important project. We have been working with excellent partners in the past. One of them obviously is Dr. Hafiz Pasha, with whom we just did an excellent study. He did a very good research on an agenda for reform in Pakistan called the Charter of Economy. And our other favorite partner is SDPI, and I really think Dr. Sajid is a very great person, and also a very deep thinker and researcher. So we're very happy, especially since the topic, the social footprint of monetary policy or the social effects of monetary policy, in my view, has been neglected very much, not just in Pakistan, but beyond, also in Germany, in Europe, and in most other countries that I'm aware of. Obviously, the social impact of monetary policy has not been talked about very much. It has been under-researched in many regards, and it has been ignored. So that's the reason that I really thought starting a debate on this topic under the leadership of Dr. Sajid is a very, very good idea, especially since it didn't aim at just sloganeering, but it was also starting dialogues with the key stakeholders, including the State Bank of Pakistan, which obviously is the key player here. That was the reason that I was really excited, and I'm very happy with the results that the team under Dr. Sajid leadership has been presenting. It just has been printed a day ago or 2 days ago, and it's online already. So I just can congratulate the researchers and SDPI for the excellent work. And that should be enough for words of greeting. Thank you so much.
Dr. Hippler, thank you so much for that very comprehensive introduction. And we all know that you've been a great support both to SDPI as well as Dr. Pasha's work, which we have all seen. It brings me great pleasure now to request Dr. Hafiz Pasha, the session of the chair and our keynote speaker. Dr. Pasha, Professor Emeritus at the BNU, an eminent economist, former federal minister, continuing academic of the highest caliber, and a great TV personality now. My personal interaction more than over a decade with him has been on fiscal policy. So I'm personally very interested to see his views on the monetary policy. Dr. Pasha, if you could, take us through what the SBP could do in this transition, what the stakeholders could do, what the academia could do to promote the agenda of the social footprint of the monetary policy in Pakistan. The floor is yours, Dr. Pasha.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I also want to thank Dr. Hippler for all the support that he has provided to us in Pakistan. And you know, one of the reasons why I in particular have preferred to work with Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Foundation is because it is a great believer in supporting social democracy in the world. And this is a view that we have all subscribed to from the very beginning. And I must say the quality and the level of support provided is outstanding in character. Can I go ahead?
Please do.
Yes. Okay, let me start first by quoting Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. I am grateful to the SDPI for having asked me to be the session chair and also the keynote speaker. In the time available to me, I will try and cover some of the bigger issues which have already been highlighted in the introduction. The focus historically in terms of social impact of policy has been very much in the domain of fiscal policy. And it has been seen primarily as an instrument of redistribution, of perhaps accessing the poor more directly, and also in terms of other types of expenditure, subsidy, intervention. There has seldom been a discussion on the social impact of monetary policy. And this, in fact, is perhaps a result of the fact that when you talk of money, you immediately begin to forget the social dimensions. You focus psychologically on money, cash, currency, circulation, so on and so forth. And this has been very unfortunate because, in fact, in the context of most developing countries, there is indeed a dimension of social intervention in the context of monetary policy. For the first time, I think the federal budget presented by the present government, by the finance minister in June this year, highlighted perhaps what he called, and I think very aptly, the bottom-up approach. This is a move away from the traditional view that let's first have growth and then we can see what the trickle-down effect turns out to be, and hopefully that will alleviate poverty. However, the budget this was presented this year represented a fundamental breakthrough in thinking in terms not only of an expansionary fiscal policy, but of a bottom-up approach in the context of credit policies. Particularly the idea that we should expand the access and coverage of somewhat subsidized credit with suitable government guarantees and credit guarantees to the multitude of small and medium enterprises and individuals in the country. This to me was a big breakthrough in thought, at least. Of course, it has been somewhat frustrated more recently by the discussions with the fund. But Pakistan, after the approval by the Honorable Prime Minister, has now got what we call the Kamyab Pakistan program of small loans to persons and SMEs over 3 years, involving and tripling or even quadrupling the access to the lower segments of our population. So there is now, for the first time, this bottom-up approach has brought to bear some of the social dimensions of particularly financial sector and banking policies. Let me also say that, for the record, the central bank, the State Bank of Pakistan, did a stellar job immediately after COVID-19 in reviving the economy and in restoring the process of growth, perhaps even accelerating it by bringing down the policy rate dramatically from 13.25% to 7%, and by offering a plethora of very special financing packages, very well targeted. But one of the best examples is the turf facility which enabled much more investment, particularly in sectors like textiles. So the role of the central bank in promoting growth was manifest in very clear exemplary terms by what the State Bank of Pakistan did in the aftermath of COVID-19. So this again highlights, because the growth dimension inevitably implies the relationship with poverty, employment, and so on. Now I'm afraid that there has been a big change in the thought processes, both at the federal as well as at the level of the central bank. And there is much more talk now of the role of monetary policy in reducing the current account deficit in the balance of payments, which is back to its traditional role of being one of the key agents and mechanisms and instruments for stabilization. And this is where it gets us into tough territory once again. And this is very much the contemporary context that Khaqan wanted us to focus on. Unfortunately, what has happened is in the month of November, we saw an all-time record level of trade deficit of over $5 billion in 1 month. I mean, this number is scary. And this represented an increase of over 130% over the level that was prevailing in the same month last year. Now, the estimate is that the current account deficit of Pakistan is operating, if it continues at this level, it will reach 5.5% of the GDP, which is something like $16 to $17 billion. The central bank has said now, and this is, I'm quoting a very useful article written by the deputy governor 2 days ago, in which he says we will target for a current account deficit of 4% of the GDP. So the idea is to bring down the deficit from potentially 5.5% of the GDP to 4% of the GDP, and to use monetary policy as one of the prime, perhaps the key instrument for achieving this reduction through exchange rate policies and through the enhancements in the central policy rate and so on. Hello? Yes?
Yes, we can hear you, Yes, we can hear you, Dr. Pasha. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. What I have done with my students over the last few months, my 2 PhD students, is we have built a 56 equation macroeconomic model, which really required a tremendous amount of effort. And let me tell you some of the fascinating findings. The first, what does the exchange rate depreciation do to the economy? The findings on the basis of simulations of the model are that it does have a minor effect on positive on growth because it tends to reduce the trade deficit. While it has negative impacts on investment and so on, the net effect is marginally positive. But because it leads to much higher inflation, particularly of imported food items, it leads to a significant increase in inequality. And the end result is that the social impact of exchange rate, eventually depreciation, is increased poverty and increased inequality. Second, interest rates, what do they do? When you raise the policy rate, leading to an overall general increase in interest rates, your growth rate inevitably comes down. And interestingly, the model shows that inequality, however, also goes up. And that is because the savers do much better. And the end result is that both these negative effects, one, lower growth, higher inequality, lead to an increase in poverty, which is much stronger than in the case of devaluation. So to bring the current account deficit to 4% of the GDP in 21-22 from the projected 5.5% will lead to some very unfortunate social consequences, which perhaps in a sense are deemed by the government or by the central bank as inevitable. Our model projects that this year, if we try and achieve this significant reduction in the current account deficit of 1.5% of the GDP, 6 to 8 million more people will fall below the poverty line. And this is at a time when, after COVID-19, we did see a precipitate fall in the employment levels and a rise in poverty. Also, it is going to bring down the GDP growth rate by 1.25 to 1.5% as compared to the government's target of close to 5%. So we'll be in the range of below 4%. Therefore, given this pressure for focusing on managing the balance of payments and ensuring the external viability of Pakistan's commitments to our borrowers and so on, there is a need to ensure that, to the extent possible, that this primary concern does not dominate so much that the human face of monetary policy for stabilization of the economy is forgotten. This is the real concern we have today. There are instruments still available, for instance, managing the flow of credit, allowing the Kamyab Pakistan to proceed, perhaps not at the same scale, but at a modified scale, focusing on ensuring there is no transfer of credit from the smaller provinces to the larger provinces, ensuring much more equity in the distribution of credit among sectors, and so on. So this is why I was very keen that we have this session. Unfortunately, I was told that the governor is going to be making the initial statement, but he probably preferred not to participate in a discussion on the social impact of monetary policies. Let me conclude by saying that there is a need to emphasize, given the very clear link of monetary policy with the impact on poverty and employment and on social indicators, that there must continue, and I emphasize this, of accountability of the Central Bank of Pakistan, the State Bank of Pakistan, to the Parliament. The Parliament is the supreme body in a democratic system. As such, the proposed law amendment to the SBP Act of a very sweeping and wide-ranging nature must allow and focus on ensuring a degree of accountability of the State Bank of Pakistan to the Parliament. The inflation rate target in a developing country like Pakistan must rest with the National Economic Council, which is chaired by the Honorable Prime Minister of Pakistan. And very importantly, we should ensure that there continues to be a degree of coordination with other ministries. Otherwise, we will agree and concede and totally recognize the need for the central bank, the State Bank of Pakistan, to have complete autonomy in operational issues, but not on policy issues. This is the difference. And we will therefore look forward very keenly to the actual amended law, which is going to be submitted shortly to the Parliament, which has been under pressure from the IMF for us to push through as soon as possible. Let me conclude by saying that I have been involved in this project in my own way, and Dr. Sajid and others have came to see me also in Lahore. It was a good, strong effort, and I'm looking forward to seeing their final report. And thanks once again to Dr. Hippler and FES, and also to Khaqan, who I've seen after a long time. Thank you very much.
That was a brilliant address by Dr. Pasha, someone we have come to respect in all aspects of the economic work taking place in Pakistan. So folks, for you, what he has said, for the common people, because the idea is for us to be able to talk to you, that initially when the budget came in, we thought that there will be a 2 to 3% of GDP of the current account of the country. That has gone far beyond. Now a correction is taking place. For correction, monetary policy is being used as a key instrument. But while that monetary policy instrument is used, it has an effect on inequality. It has an effect on poverty. He estimates 6 to 8 million people may fall into poverty if that 1 to 1.5% correction of GDP of the current account is to be done in the coming months, which is already underway. So that is the whole idea, that the monetary policy actions affect the lives of the common people of Pakistan. I'm very glad that he has put some modeling, and that gives perspective to what is going to happen in the coming months. Dr. Pasha has rightly said, what we are trying to do is move beyond the fiscal policy. Numerous discussion over 10 to 15 years between Dr. Pasha and me have been on fiscal policy. We have sat on the 4th floor in Q Block and discussed this policy again. But monetary policy and the effect is now the narrative that we are trying to create. In that narrative, the anchor of that narrative is Dr. Sajid Amin. When he came to me to help him do this, I was really glad. I was glad because we will move the debate beyond the traditional policy. Dr. Sajid, fellow at the research fellow at SDPI, head of policy solutions lab at SDPI. His research is interdisciplinary, and that's what really made me come and help him in this. He has anchored this agenda. He has reached to key stakeholders, including the SBP, the former governors, most of them, academia, and he was in talk with the media. He shared with me the other day, making it as rich as possible. Today's talk, today's agenda is also about that. The topic of his presentation, again, understanding social dimension of monetary policy in Pakistan. Dr. Sajid, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum ji, everyone online and in person here. Let me start by thanking for a very generous introduction and the feedback from Dr. Hippler as well. I have a long list of thanks before I come to the presentation, but I'll just sum up that everybody who has contributed to this discussion, this production of paper, we from SDPI are really thankful to FES, to Dr. Hafiz, Pasha Saab, the members of the Inception Committee, Dr. Aliya, Dr. Hamza, Dr. Wasim, Shahid, long list. On the paper, while you see my only, the single name, Sajid Amin, but that's for some technical reasons. This paper belongs to everybody who has contributed throughout this discussion. And actually they contributed more than me, honestly. The kind of, when I came, it was a very raw idea, but kind of consolidating it, bringing into some boundaries where we can see a good shape of it coming out. All credit to the Inception Committee, which helped us refine agenda, and the consultations, all the participants, students, faculty, thought leaders, State Bank of Pakistan, the highest management we met. So thanks to everyone. So long list, but I have 10 minutes, so I'll cut it short. And coming to, I'm sure you have grasped so far what we are talking about. We are talking that monetary policy is a public policy, and the impact goes beyond current account deficit and exchange rate management. It affects day-to-day life of the common man. Interest rate जब बढ़ता है, तो सिर्फ करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट दुरुस्त नहीं होता. अकबरी मंडी में शालमी की मार्केट में काम करने वाला एक जो मजदूर है, उस तक इसका असर जो है वो जाता है. So I'll be just presenting you some of the thoughts that we have consolidated over this one. Is it working?
We have your first slide. Now your second.
Exactly. Now it is. So this is the overarching objective. You can see this was the beginning of the idea. So the main focus is on the building a narrative actually. At this phase, at this stage, we are not bringing you any very hardcore evidence that what is the size of the impact of changes in monetary policy decisions are central banking on poverty, inequality, long agenda, climate change, and much more. The purpose was, let's broaden the debate of monetary policy. Monetary policy has become a kind of a very specific audience policy. I mean, how many of you have read monetary policy statement of last policy? I'll not see any hand. Actually, this has been what I have been seeing over the last 6 months. And this was one of the most important policy statement, because even you have to prepone the MPC committee meeting, but almost many of you are economic students and none of you has read MPS. This is how it has been a kind of the gap between the public at large, the common man, and the monetary policy. So what we are trying to do is kind of debunk this gap. And this is the idea to broaden and deepening the debate and research agenda, both within a State Bank of Pakistan and out of State Bank of Pakistan, academia, civil society, policy think tanks. This is the overarching objective that we wanted to achieve. Am I on the next slide or not?
Yes,
yeah, this
are.
is exactly. I think you can move it maybe better. The aim is, while we are talking about monetary policy, but the ultimate goal is not, or the end objective is not monetary policy in itself. The idea is to integrate monetary policy into the broader development agenda of the country. Right now, even when you talk about inflation, it's mostly fiscal policy, it's the government. I mean, one of the key the kind of argument that we faced while we were going for the consultations at the highest level, even ex-governors and the levels, that why you are talking monetary policy when you are talking poverty and inequality. So that is the level of the disconnect between the issues of public policy and the monetary policy. So the idea is that we can bring the social considerations in design and implementation of monetary policy. And
we have lost your voice.
can you hear now?
Now you're back.
Great, thank you. There is now, particularly after the COVID-19, there is now a rethinking on the economic policies, including monetary policy. So that pushed us. Second point is that monetary policy and central banking in general is going through transition in Pakistan, that Dr. Pasha also referred to. A central bank, State Bank of Pakistan, with more autonomy and most probably going towards inflation targeting as a regime. So we thought this is where we need to kind of discuss the disconnect between the issues of public policy, because once you have a more autonomy, the more space, the responsibility is higher on you, and we thought this may be a good time to discuss. Finally, and most interestingly, you can see some kind of figures there of the papers. We done a systematic analysis of the titles of the working papers published over the last 20 years in the State Bank of Pakistan. None of them has the word poverty or inequality in the title. None of them. Over the last 20 years, 107 working papers. So that is the disconnect. But at the same time, it is not only the State Bank of Pakistan. We tried to find, even in the academia and the civil society organizations, we could hardly find any one or two papers, even that were very technical, more kind of. So this motivated us to push for this agenda. Next, please. So this is what Dr. Pasha has already kind of elaborated on, so I'll just stop. That there are many channels through which monetary policy decisions can have a differentiated impact. For example, increase in money supply affects rich and poor differently. The effect depends on what is your portfolio. Do you have bonds as your major savings, or you have a cash? And cash is basically an asset of the poor. So this is how there is a differentiated impact. One is also on the interest rate, for example. Let's see the interest rate increase for economic stabilization. what it happens actually that economic activity slows down. So the people, those who are working in elementary occupations, informal sector, labor market, they lose their jobs. While those who have monetary assets, bonds, work in the capital market or the financial market, they may earn money from this interest rate hike. So this is how there is a differentiated impact. Unfortunately, the discussion on monetary policies stops on the aggregates that you increase interest rate, inflation is controlled, stabilization is done. That's it. And this is only what is covered in a monetary policy statement as well. But we are asking, this is an outcome. What is the impact? That needs to be considered. Actually, the impact is on the one who lost his job in terms of your economic stabilization. So this is what we are trying is that monetary policy need to go beyond the outcome-based approach. It also need to consider the impact and incidence of its actions and decisions. Next, please. So I have covered this one. Please next. If we see overall the central banking, there has been some good initiatives that Dr. Pasha has also, highlighted the green financing schemes, financial inclusion schemes, SMEs financing schemes like TURF and much more. But we are mainly focused on monetary policy for at least two reasons. The one we think is that monetary policy is the central policy of the State Bank of Pakistan. The rest are the residual policies. Actually, by residual not mean that they are not important. I mean, you cannot hold State Bank accountable for them if they don't do it. I mean, if there was no TURF, there is no accountability that you can hold responsible State Bank for not any TURF. But for monetary policy, this is the prime objective of State Bank of Pakistan to deliver on the price stability. And tools, mediums, forums, frameworks used to achieve that price stability must be considerate of the social implication. And this is how monetary policy can contribute to the overall development agenda of the country. The purpose is not to criticize monetary policy at all. It is to broaden the debate, to set this debate in Pakistan. Definitely not necessarily that whatever we are saying is right. There may be an opposite view as well. The only purpose is to bring that opposite view on the table, that let's discuss and open this discussion. Next, please. We have a very extensive methodology. I mean, we have covered desk reviews, consultations. The purpose was to contextualize this discussion for Pakistan. It was easy to write a 30-page paper sitting on the table in the room, quite easy, but that should have not been contextualized for Pakistan. Not every best practices when it comes to implementation. So with the kind guidance of Hafiz Pasha Sahab and all our inception committee and participants of the consultations, we try to contextualize. Next, please. So here are some key findings or the key recommendations that we are giving to promote social agenda in the monetary policy and central banking in general as well. The first and foremost, one confusion that we came across is that when we see that the monetary policy should be considerate of its social footprint, many raised an objection that you are asking State Bank of Pakistan to deviate from its mandate. I mean, inequality is not a mandate of State Bank of Pakistan. So this is our first recommendation. We are not asking State Bank of Pakistan to deviate from its target or the mandate of price stability. Rather, this is our first recommendation that State Bank of Pakistan should deliver on price stability. Unfortunately, so far, State Bank of Pakistan has been delivering on the random moving inflation targets. Every year there is a change in the target. This year, if it is the 7%, the next 2 years or 3 years, it can be 9 or 11%, the target itself. So while SBP may deliver on that target, but that erodes purchasing power of the people. So this is right. State Bank is asking very rightly that it needs to go for inflation targeting. There is a very clear set of target of inflation. And we are proposing, if you can see the blue line there, this is the red dots also in the screen. This is actually how a random volatile, the target of inflation itself was set by the government for the State Bank of Pakistan. So in current regime, State Bank of Pakistan was made to chase ever-changing inflation targets. They keep changing. So this one implication, there are many implications, but one implication is that it makes your policy rate changes very volatile. Because every year your target is changing, or every 3 years your target is changing. So and there is a high target of inflation. On average, Pakistan inflation is 7 to 8%, so it keeps changing. So you have to have a high interest rate, which creates inequality and other social implications. We are proposing that Pakistan needs to go towards inflation targeting. But the one point that we deviate from the current discussion is that what should be the target rate of inflation. The current discussion may be around 7 to 9%, but we think maybe this can help you growth or whatever it is, inflation revenues. But this creates inequalities because the real wage growth is much lower in Pakistan. So even if you are delivering on 9% or 7% and real wage growth is 3%, you are continuously eroding the purchasing power of the poor. They are the most hit by the inflation. So we are proposing the starting with the 5% target and then gradually bringing it down to 3%. It has multiple implications. It will, in the first phase, increase your real wage because the inflation is low now. The set base of inflation is low. So the real wage will be positive because of low interest rate. The low inflation target. But in the second round impacts, it will promote growth, reduce inequality, and ultimately leads to a high productivity-led wage growth. So the proposal here is deliver on price stability, not on moving inflation targets, but keep the inflation target low. The idea should be, or the framework should be, the social impact of that inflation, not only exclusively that what is growth enhancing inflation. A growth enhancing inflation can at the same time reduce, the increase inequalities and poverty at the same time. Next, please. The one debate that we come across is always, and many of you know, is that inflation is a supply side. This is the phenomena, but we don't have any estimate how much is of its supply side. So one way to kill this argument, because as Dr. Pasha said, if you are giving autonomy, there needs to be a very strong accountability. And accountability is only possible if you have a very standard, in black and white, written secondary legislations that what should be the target of inflation and what is the indicator that you are actually targeting. So one way to reduce that supply side argument may be at initial stages to sort of target the non-food, non-energy core inflation instead of headline inflation. So this can be the starting point, but definitely this can be discussed. Next, please. So all the targets should be quantifiable for the monetary policy. For example, if you see the Amendment Act 2021, it says the tertiary target is, even in the first target is domestic price stability. What does it mean? That needs to be clearly laid out by secondary legislation, that this is the inflation target, this is the indicator to be achieved. So this is the deviation which is allowed. And if you go beyond that deviation, you have to explain. Similarly, if you see the tertiary target, that State Bank of Pakistan will support economic policies. That is again a vague. There is many quantifiable targets. For example, Bank of New Zealand follows that increasing sustained employment. That can be a quantifiable target, and that also reduces your, it's linked to your social considerations. Next, please. One of the key problems that State Bank of Pakistan itself realizes, that is the how to communicate. What is the how to communicate central banking decisions and monetary policy? Right now, for example, monetary policy statement starts with the current account deficit, stops at exchange rate. It gives you an overview of global changes, but it does not add any single thing on what are the side effects of this decision, intended or unintended. What we are proposing is that central bank need to have a very clear communication, 4 to 5 very key elements. The one, what is the state of situation? What is the inflation in current month? Is it deviating from the target? How much is the deviation and what are the reasons for that deviations? What are the plans to remove those deviations? What is the impact of those deviations on common man? And what can central bank or the government do to minimize those negative side effects and increase? So it simply that the communication needs to go beyond outcomes and focus on impact and incidence. And this applies to all communications going beyond monetary policy statements. So one point that we are also trying to keep accountability ensure that monetary policy decisions not should be given a summary that's 3 said yes, 2 said no, 3 said raise, 2 said no raise. There should be clear names who said raise and who said no raise or what raise, because that is fundamental for the accountability if there are deviations. Then you will be able to hold who said raise and who said no raise, and then you can kind of hold accountability. I'm just summarizing this. You have details in the paper.
Dr. Sajid, agar hum conclusion ki taraf chale jaएं.
Last 2 minutes, maximum 3 minutes, I'm concluding. The State Bank of Pakistan, in particular, as a custodian of monetary policy, and academia and civil society needs to expand its research agenda on monetary policy. It needs to go beyond very technical models, though they have their own value, but definitely they needs to be calibrated, or there needs to be new research on social footprint of monetary policy. How Pakistan monetary policy can affect inequality. What is the size of that impact? Who are the loser groups? Who are the gainers from the interest rate hikes? What is the gain? So these and for this we are proposing a broad-based collaboration within the State Bank of Pakistan. Interdepartmental collaborations are very critical, but at the same time, State Bank of Pakistan and academia, State Bank of Pakistan and civil society, and they all need to have a very inclusive and participatory research agenda, which focus on, but State Bank of Pakistan has to take lead on this one. And it was very happy that when we went to meet the team State Bank of Pakistan, they were welcoming and opening. Today, unfortunately, we were told that Governor State Bank of Pakistan has to go abroad, most probably yesterday. So he initially thought to give us a video message. He was in Islamabad, but unfortunately, given his very busy schedule, we couldn't even get the video. But there was a very welcoming position on this agenda. And they have been on the board since the inception of this idea. Next, please. This is exactly how I've covered that it needs to enhance its interaction. There can be multiple ways. You can find the details in the papers. Next, please. This is very important and critical, that decision-making forums, while we are talking about promoting women financial inclusion, but the decision-making forums of central banking and monetary policy are devoid of that representativeness and the representation. If you can see the tables next, please. Can you go? Yeah. You can start from 2005, 10, whatever the tables are there. There was never more than one woman in the monetary policy committee, in the state bank governor, and the board of directors. So this is how non-participatory, how gender imbalanced decision-making forums are. So this is, we are not saying it just for the sake of gender. There is a very growing evidence that when there is a gender balance, the monetary policy or the central bank has been better able to cope inflation. There is very growing evidence coming on. So it's good to see how it can happen in Pakistan. Next, please. And finally, we are concluding that State Bank of Pakistan has taken some initiatives that needs to be recalibrated, rethought through, or maybe refined, if this is the right word. For example, we have focused on three key roles. Rethinking the role and the purpose of the State Bank of Pakistan memorial chairs in economics. We have Wasim Shahid with us. I'm sure he will be guiding us more on this one. But some exceptions are there. Otherwise, the memorial chairs have been working more or less the similar issues, similar topics, similar approach, similar methods, which State Bank of Pakistan itself is doing. So we think this is a replication. So there can be a clear division of labor. That what will be the memorial chairs contributing. One way will be that translating that message of technical research into a non-technical research. The other will be that SDPI chairs may be requested to focus on social agenda. And very happy that Dr. Wasim Sawas have been focusing on this. One of my assistant and Dr. Sidra has just produced a thesis on monetary policy and inequality in Pakistan under the guidance of Wasim Saab. Finally, on the memorial chairs is that economy is not only economics. Economic attitudes come from sociology, from anthropology, from many others. So there can be an option opening memorial chairs in other than economics departments as well, and combining them together so that there is a good research. Next. NIBAF needs a reorientation in this one. So detail is available in the paper and PowerPoint. I close on the last slide, please, if you can go the previous one, please, this one. The one key point is that when I had to discuss these issues, I had to travel to Karachi. I didn't go to the regional office of State Bank of Pakistan in Islamabad or Pindi because they are not serving anything other than the cash houses. But we are trying to convey that regional office should be mini SDPs for that region. They should have their own research agenda for that reason, and they should be the central focus. And I think this can help also to cover that missing regional perspective in monetary policy decisions and discussions. So SBP regional offices can be many SBPs. Thank you. I'm sorry I have taken too much time. Thank you so much.
That's okay, Dr. Sajid. You are our key anchor of this research work, so that's fine. तो देखें, Dr. Sajid ने कुछ बहुत अहम बातें की हैं. एक तो वो ये कह रहे हैं कि जो ये मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी है, ये एक पब्लिक पॉलिसी है. जैसे आप टैक्स पॉलिसी का इंसिडेंस अपने ऊपर देखते हैं, इसी तरह मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी का ना सिर्फ आप पे बट उन एंटरप्रेन्योर्स पे भी जो डिसीजंस कर रहे हों इन्वेस्टमेंट के, उन पे भी जाता है. उन्होंने ये भी कहा कि इसका टारगेट बड़ा क्वांटिफाइबल होना चाहिए और शायद पाकिस्तान के लिए इसको हमें इन्फ्लेशन टारगेटिंग को 5% के करीब लाना चाहिए. उन्होंने ये भी कहा कि इसकी कम्युनिकेशन बहुत आसान होनी चाहिए और इसकी कम्युनिकेशन में इसका सोशल इम्पैक्ट हर जब भी मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी स्टेटमेंट आए वो आया होना चाहिए और लोगों को इसको आसानी से समझना चाहिए कि उनकी रोज़मर्रा ज़िंदगी पे क्या असर आ सकता है, एंटरप्रेन्योर्स पे क्या असर आ सकता है. फिर उन्होंने ये भी कहा कि इसका एक इंक्लूसिव रिसर्च एजेंडा होना चाहिए. ये तो बात हमने बारहा की है और शायद सदियों से कर रहे हैं कि पाकिस्तान में यूनिवर्सिटीज़ को, पाकिस्तान में सबको साथ लेके चलना चाहिए एक एजेंडे पे जो कि पब्लिक सेक्टर इंस्टीट्यूशन से इंटीग्रेट किया जा सके. और आखिर में असल बात यह है कि ये सारी रिसर्च का मकसद कोई किसी को अच्छा या बुरा कहना नहीं है, बल्कि ये है कि एक नैरेटिव बिल्ड किया जाए, एक नया नैरेटिव हो जो दुनिया में भी बिल्ड हो रहा है और पाकिस्तान में भी होना ज़रूरी है. एंड दैट टेक्स मी वेरी वेल इनटू द पैनल दैट वी हैव, अ वेरी डिस्टिंग्विश्ड पैनल. और हमारे पहले पार्टिसिपेंट हैं डॉक्टर हमजा अली मलिक. He is director at the UNESCAP. He has been a director of the monetary policy of the State Bank of Pakistan, so no one more appropriate. Let me set the stage. Dr. Hamza, 11.2% CPI, 18% SPI, 27% WPI in the month closing November. Rising inflation in the country, everyone's concerned. From the government to the thelewala, everyone's concerned. So can you please talk to us about the price stability? How central is that agenda today to the central bank? What steps the central bank can take? How could the future be looking into a more inflation targeting central bank? And if you could, it would be great if you could share some insights from the regional countries around us. The floor is yours, Dr. Hamza.
Thank you, Najeeb. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good afternoon. Warm welcome from Bangkok. Thank you, Sajid and SDPI colleagues. I take it as a continuation of the conversation we have been having for the past several months, starting in September, even before that. And then since then, several chats, informal chats with Sajid. I'm very glad to see from Sajid's presentation that he's been listening to me and he has been taken on board several of the points I've discussed with him, and he's made it very, very clear. So I'll be echoing some of the points, but I prepared these remarks yesterday when I received the questions. My focus is going to be a bit narrow, primarily on the priceability, as Khaqan asked me the question. So for me, it's a categorical statement. Low and stable inflation for a sustained period, to me, that's the definition of price stability, is critical to ensure social well-being in a society for many reasons. It improves long-term growth prospects, helps address poverty, mitigate inequalities, so on and so forth. So it is not just a typical technical economic issue that is usually viewed and analyzed through a lens of figuring out trade-offs with economic growth, as is the common practice. The link with the overall social welfare is important, though missing in most of the discussion. And as Khaqan was quoting numbers, Pakistan continues to experience high and volatile inflation, which is hurting the lower income groups the most. Pakistan stands out like a sore thumb in the region. I look after about 53 countries here. Nowhere else we see that kind of very basic macro instability in the form of high and volatile inflation, resort to IMF programs, business cycles going 3 or 4 years. That's about it, up and down. It's very, very terrible that we have not managed to fix the very basics of the whole thing as yet. This has obvious implications for the social well-being and cohesion. So bottom line is, the inflation or keeping inflation low and stable for a sustained period must remain on the high agenda of policymakers and central bank in Pakistan. And I congratulate SDPI for taking this initiative and doing very formal research on that. The issue is the contribution and importance of low and stable inflation is not very well understood and appreciated in Pakistan. Actually, on the contrary, to make matters worse, the debate is not really settled whether inflation is indeed a problem and or central bank or monetary policy has any role in controlling it. I have heard several very senior, well-respected, responsible economists like Nadeem ul Haq, like Dr. Ishwaq, basically putting it aside. Inflation is not a problem in Pakistan, peddling conspiracy theories by Dr. Ishwaq, that there has been ishara from somewhere which has been trying to destabilize the economy. Coming these kind of very irresponsible remarks from very senior economists has really muddled the debate on inflation. It is affecting how the common man perceives central bank and is hurting its credibility. In the process, it is hurting the social well-being. So the issue at hand is, what can SPP and government do about it? The very first point is something Sajid already alluded to. Actually, his very first recommendation. We need a very formal and very clear definition of low and stable price stability. What do we mean by price stable? How do you know that the prices have been stable now, or central bank has delivered low and stable inflation? This is entirely missing in Pakistan. Currently, as happens, as Sajid was explaining, an annual inflation target is provided by the government every year, which keeps changing from year to year, depending on the actual inflation delivered. This needs to change. The target should be the one that delivers low and stable inflation. And then central bank and monetary policy actions should be held accountable in delivering that. So what should be the definition of low and stable inflation? Surprisingly, the literature is actually not very clear on that, though there are some approaches and estimations that are available, both from global evidence from the region and in Pakistan. However, most of these approaches still view the issue from the lens of economic growth only, and not from the overall social well-being. To me, this is the value addition of this project that Sajid is leading. So a working practical approach could be to link it with stabilizing purchasing power of the population, which can be proxied by real wages. However, more research is needed in Pakistan to figure out what is the average wage growth, given labor market conditions and productivity levels. If wage growth is around 5%, you can start by targeting inflation for 5 years for at least 3 years. And then say, this is, if I deliver that, I have delivered low and stable inflation. This very basic economics 101 kind of consideration is actually surprisingly missing in Pakistan in these kind of debates. I will also echo what Dr. Pasha was saying in his opening remarks, that the inflation target on this approach that I was proposing and as Sajid was highlighting should be set by the government, by the National Economic Council, not by the central bank. I'll touch on that point in a minute a bit later. My second main recommendation is central bank must step up its communication strategy and engagement on the issue of low and stable inflation with public at large. Just issuing a policy statement every 2 months, explaining inflation dynamics, economic conditions is necessary, but certainly not sufficient. When people are experiencing inflation, they are essentially experiencing loss in purchasing power. They are not really interested in knowing this is because the global commodity prices have gone up or government has been borrowing too much from central bank. There may be explanatory factors you may want to document in the report, but to communicate to the public, to convince them that this institution, the central bank, is serving in the best interest of the population, they have to explain and do a far better job. And they're not engaging at that level with the public, in my opinion, in Pakistan. They're living at a very high level, and even in high level, they're missing. Nobody from State Bank, I think, is here today, which is, again, not very encouraging sign. So central bank staff, not just the governor, not just the deputy governor, central bank staff will have to consistently, repeatedly engage with academia, researchers, think tanks, and public at large through seminars, organizing conferences, electronic and social media, policy brief, blogs, you name it. They have to be all over the issue everywhere, all the time. At the moment, SBP is mostly missing from such conversations. SPP basically will have to explain in most simple language what price stability definition they are aiming at, what policies are they pursuing to deliver at, why they are unable to deliver on the target, if that is the case, and what is constraining them to do so. And importantly, what are going to be the consequences if they continue to miss that? They have to convincingly explain that central bank is the institution responsible for low and stable inflation. This basic fact to me is still not settled in Pakistan. People still question whether central bank has any role to begin with in controlling inflation or not. So basically, central bank needs to articulate a narrative on the importance of low and stable inflation. And this, they have to invest in training their staff. A small related point, I will be very brief on this one, although I have details, but in the interest of time, central bank should also models that explicitly define or redefine the social well-being. Currently, the typical approach is mainstream macro research, which essentially also influences SPP research also, is a maximization of material output or simply GDP. It then assumes this is the same thing as maximizing economic welfare. That is certainly not the case. Whenever the central bank, we did develop heterogeneous agent new Keynesian or HANK models, as opposed to just representative on the DST models, and to try and study what is the impact of key policy issues in Pakistan, like fiscal dominance, policy credibility imperfections, credit market imperfections, and many of the practical issues that you face in Pakistan. So at a technical level, more work is required, although central bank is still doing far better than academia and many other researchers, I think, in my opinion. But coming to the third main point, SPP needs to establish trust and credibility with regards to delivering low and stable inflation. This is missing in Pakistan, in my understanding, and for this, they need independence. Now, the moment you use the word independence in the context of central bank, people go crazy in Pakistan. I've heard all sorts of very weird commentary, and being a part of several webinars, where people making very strange kind of statement. Very responsible, I must say, very non-serious, but coming from, as I said, very, very senior and known names. So it's very unfortunate. An independent central bank, necessary for its credibility, remains a controversial, poorly understood and discussed issue in Pakistan. We know the reaction. I won't go into detail when the new changes in SPP law were discussed. I'll mention one of them actually in the end, echoing Dr. Pasha's comment earlier. To appreciate, we simply need to understand SPP is just an institution of the state and the government, in a strict sense, cannot be independent of it, independent of state or government. What it needs to be independent is of the Ministry of Finance's influence. SPP should be answerable to the government's National Assembly through the pertinent committee. So a new change in SPP law actually reflects that. I haven't seen anybody talk about those things in that specificity. How do you get independence of the dominance of Ministry of Finance? This is a whole topic in its own right. The issue of direct and unlimited borrowing from Ministry of Finance that has been going on unchecked pretty much for years. Only when in the IMF program, there is some discipline imposed from outside, but internally, I think people don't even buy it. This is a problem. There is interference in the setting of policy interest. I've witnessed to that myself as a director of monetary policy in the past. And there is a direct interference on exchange rate level and use of foreign exchange reserves that leads to instability, balance payment crises in several times. The Ministry of Finance would really have to back off and give space to central bank in delivering the targets that the government will be setting for the central bank. And that's where I want to echo Dr. Pasha's observation that you need to have monetary and fiscal coordination board, which has been abolished in the new SPP law, which is not a good move. Without effective coordination, it will be difficult for central bank to figure out what else is going on in other key policy levers of the government. I can skip this one. Last point, 1 more minute. This is an important one. An almost continuous resort to IMF programs and bailout in Pakistan, roughly average 3 to 4 years, has depleted policy credibility and policy ownership in Pakistan, which to me has seriously damaged social welfare. I don't think so. We have serious research out there which can answer a very basic question. Why Pakistan keeps going back to IMF program if we don't like being in the IMF program? Since 1988, we have been continuously in the IMF program, 14 or 15 programs already. Most of them have failed. And if I ask you to come up with a paper, a commentary which analyzes this issue, you won't find that. We did some work in central bank. We were not allowed to publish it outside, but other researchers should evaluate that. Central bank should actually discuss it much more openly and freely. IMF supported policies tend to be contractionary. That's their purpose, to stabilize, and typically leads to lower economic growth, higher unemployment, which has adverse consequences for social well-being. So even if some policies are good and are needed, they are largely perceived as foreign, with the central bank perceived as an agent of the foreign agenda of keeping Pakistan's economy weak. I don't know why we as a nation, as a country, we have this conspiracy mindset. Why can't we analyze issues as its face value? If we keep giving subsidies unlimited, why nobody's asking the question, who's paying for that at the end of the day? We don't print dollars. So if Dr. Pasha was quoting trade deficit, shocking, 5 billion deficit. You're not printing dollars. Where are you gonna come up with $5 billion when you're struggling to attract investment in your country? When you're struggling to even attract cricket to your own country? These are very serious and basic issues, but we don't discuss them directly on the content of the issue. We get into this foreign agenda, a conspiracy of planting this person here and planting that person here. That's just very irresponsible. That can happen in newspapers here and there, but serious webinars, conferences, we expect much more. One final thought, which I have shared with Sajid several times, we need to be careful regarding the multiplicity of objectives given to an arguably independent central bank. If you want to bring in, central bank should also pay attention to inequality and poverty or other social considerations, it can create problems. Central bank basically will be very keen on creating a mythology that their task is very complicated and beyond the understanding of a non-specialist. And thus they cannot be blamed for poor performance, as there are many factors affecting the policy outcomes. They would tend to attribute success to themselves and their independence, but blame external shocks, whether from Ministry of Finance, IMF dictation, whatever, or political interference for their failures. We don't want that. We want to give them independence, but we want to hold them accountable on delivering low and stable inflation clearly defined. Support to other social objectives, such as mitigating inequalities or whatever, should come after the low and stable inflation objective has been met in Pakistan, which is not the case. Thank you, Khaqan, once again, and thank you, Sajid, once again, for keeping me engaged in this extremely interesting, exciting topic for the last several months. Look forward to the rest of the speakers.
Hamza, glad to see the same clarity you've always had. Bilkul sahi keh rahe hain, 22 program IMF ke kiye. Hamza and I were very, very deeply involved in the last program that Pakistan completed in 16 or 17. So you can know that when we say to you that Pakistan has to do its own heavy lifting in all agendas, in all kinds of communication, you've got to believe this. And that's the way forward for Pakistan. Hame apni surgery khud karni hai. For the time being, difficulty में जरूर फंड के पास जाए. हमजा ने बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बात की. देखें, आपकी वेज ग्रोथ यानी कि आपकी वेजेस जितनी इंक्रीज हो रही है, मैं आसान अल्फाज में इसलिए कहता हूं कि हम आपको एंगेज करना चाहता हूं कि वो जितनी इंक्रीज हो रही है उससे एटलीस्ट जो इन्फ्लेशन है उसका टारगेट जो है लिंक करें. साजिद, आई थिंक दैट्स अ वेरी वेरी गुड रिकमेंडेशन. देखिए, एंगेजमेंट तो इतनी जरूरी है. हर पब्लिक सेक्टर इंस्टीट्यूशन के लिए, और स्टेट बैंक भी एक पब्लिक सेक्टर इंस्टीट्यूशन है. कल मैं लीडरशिप से बात कर रहा था तो उन्होंने कहा क्यों ये हो रहा है, सिर्फ एक्सचेंज रेट बिकॉज वो बहुत दिखाई देता है. मैंने कहा देखिए, 3 मार्केट्स इस वक्त बाय नहीं कर रही जो इस वक्त हो रहा है. 3 मार्केट्स क्या है? आपकी मनी मार्केट्स आर मच हायर देन योर पॉलिसी रेट, सो दे आर एक्सपेक्टिंग कि एक और हाइक आएगी. आपकी एक्सचेंज रेट की मूवमेंट आपके सामने है, डिस्पाइट के अभी $3 बिलियन और $1.2 बिलियन हमें आए हैं, और स्टॉक एक्सचेंज भी रिएक्ट करिए. सो कम्युनिकेशन इज लिटरली एवरीथिंग. यू मे बी डूइंग अ लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स व्हिच आई एम श्योर आर बीइंग डन, बट कम्युनिकेशन टू द पब्लिक, और ये तो मार्केट्स बड़ी स्मार्ट मार्केट्स हैं. सो बिल्कुल सही कहा, सिंपल लैंग्वेज में कम्युनिकेशन जो है वो बहुत जरूरी है. थैंक यू. सो रिसर्च की बात की कि इंक्लूसिव एजेंडा होना चाहिए, एंड दैट्स इज वेरी एप्टली पुट. सो मैं इस वक्त दावत दूंगा हमारे दूसरे पैनलिस्ट डॉक्टर वसीम शाहिद मलिक के, हु इज अ प्रोफेसर ऑफ इकोन एट यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ पेशावर एंड SPP मेमोरियल चेयर. Dr. Saab, if I could request you, could you tell us what are the ways of a forward-looking initiative on existing research institutions related to monetary policy, related to SPP work, and the memorial chairs, NIBAF, regional offices, और central bank इस एजेंडे को कैसे inclusive कर सकता है, और आप लोगों का क्या रोल हो सकता है? Over to you, Dr. Wasim Shahid Malik.
Thank you, Khaqan. Am I audible?
Very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to share my views. I really appreciate the efforts of SDPI for organizing this session on a somewhat neglected area in in Pakistan. I also appreciate the efforts of Dr. Sajid Amin, who presented a very good policy paper and rightly identified some of policy interventions. As I'm asked about how SDP can take initiatives. So first of all, I would like to introduce SDP's research infrastructure. SDP has a very good research infrastructure. It is home to many economists, which are placed in research department, monetary policy department, and other departments. NBOF also has a very good faculty with a primary focus on training of bankers, but they do participate in research activities as well. And now SDP has a good team of professors placed on SDP memorial chairs. SDP also has its own research journal and working paper series that publish high quality research mainly related to monetary policy issues related to Pakistan. With such a huge research infrastructure, SDP team has produced sizable research on topics such as DSG and FPAS modeling, price setting behavior, money demand functions, exchange rate misalignment, informal economy, etc., etc. And as part of SDP team, I have been working on distributional consequences of monetary policy for the last 3 years. Now coming to the question of how to expand research agenda on central banking and monetary policy to include social footprint. I would suggest to have collaborative efforts by SDP Research Department, SDP Memorial Chairs, NBOF, Ministry of Finance, and think tanks like SDPI, POIT, and others. Now in Pakistan, the main problem with any research agenda is that it is mostly thinly distributed among different academic and research institutions. So research cannot generate meaningful debate to inform policy. For collaborative research on social footprint of monetary policy, there is a need to set certain goals and research outcomes, and then to identify research questions related to different aspects of this issue. I would like to highlight 2 or 3. In case of Pakistan, inflation rate is determined by multiple factors, including excess demand, managed prices, exchange rate depreciation, international energy prices, and other supply side bottlenecks. Now, in this case, if monetary policy is not complemented by other government policies that are more focused on supply side, then monetary policy has to be more aggressive to contain inflation. And this more aggressiveness puts extra burden on government budget, which leads to limited fiscal space for government to provide social safety nets. For this year, almost 40% of the budget is allocated for debt servicing. So it is not monetary policy that directly affects social sector. Rather, it is the absence of other fiscal and central bank policies that must be complemented to make monetary policy neutral for social sector. Another issue related to inflation targeting is the measurement of inflation rate. Inflation rate is measured through CPI mostly, and the basket of CPI includes goods and services, but it doesn't include assets. So whenever there is a change in monetary policy stance or any other economic shock hits the economy, asset markets respond first and then goods market follow. But monetary policy actions are taken when goods price inflation is expected to increase. So the timing of policy decisions is determined by goods market activities and not by asset market activities. This approach has distributional consequences, and it creates a wedge between asset price inflation and goods price inflation. So that is also responsible for income and wealth inequality in Pakistan. And my last point is that another issue is related to the sectoral distribution of the effects of monetary policy. This is because private sector credit is not uniformly distributed among different sectors. For instance, automobile sector is the main beneficiary of low interest rate. That's why at a time when policy rate was low and economy was recovering from pandemic crisis, At that time, for the last quarter of this fiscal year, the overall growth rate of LSM was about 5.2%. But the automobile sector witnessed 43% growth, with 89% growth in cars manufacturing. This put undue burden on current account, which resulted in exchange rate depreciation and consequent increase in the policy rate. Now, the burden of higher interest rate and lower value of currency is not only borne by the sectors that were primarily responsible for the problem. Rather, the burden is borne by all other sectors. So unless there is fiscal arrangement that compensates discouraged sectors, monetary policy will have heterogeneous effects on sectoral economic activity. So this makes the case for fiscal and monetary policy coordination. So such research issues can be identified, and then researchers from SDP and other research institutions can be invited to participate. The output of these collaborative research efforts can be presented in a conference jointly organized by SDP and other institutions like SDPI, and then concrete policy suggestions can be highlighted to inform monetary policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Very apt point. Fiscal and monetary coordination is a key issue, and research agenda should be as broad as possible. So this takes me to my next speaker, Dr. Hassan Daoud. He's the CEO of KPK Provincial Board of Investment and Trade. Hassan Daoud Saab, wealth, as I've understood in the world, has been created by the private sector. हम बहुत ये कहते हैं कि हुकूमत इस चीज में क्या करेगी या नहीं करेगी. I now am involved in running an international hedge fund. I seldom have conversations with the other fund managers on the fiscal policy. But we are always concerned what the Fed is doing, what the Reserve Bank of Australia is doing, what is the Bank of England doing, what is going to happen to the kind of bond purchases, when is the tapering going to happen. So how concerned is the business community, or are they not that concerned? Are they not that involved? Are they understanding the impact of the monetary policy on them? Are they understanding that volatile inflation is hampering the decision-making of 5 to 10 years in the coming years? And is stable and predictable inflation one of the things they're looking for? I'm really looking forward for your insight. You've been in CPAC, you're that kind of public sector official who understands things from both sides. Over to you, Dr. Hassan Daoud.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Khaqan, and all of the organizers. It's good to see Hippler here. He's been running around Pakistan helping us understand CPAC better. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Brilliant. So I think I cannot attend this session from a better place because I'm in the FPCCI office, and just before joining you guys, I had this session with them. Also, I'm not an economist. I'm a project management specialist. So my approach would be more projectized as opposed to and please excuse me for being more candid like a project management professional is supposed to be. First of all, since you've asked me questions about the business community, I would also involve the impression that the investors get here, because in the last about 6 years, I've been closely working with the Chinese, also now in Board of Investment working with. देखिए, एक तो ये कि and I'll वो कहते भी हैं कि जब आपने दिल से बात करनी हो तो अपनी मदर टंग में ही बात करें, तो मैं I will like to speak a bit in Urdu on this. तो and I understand it's a bilingual arrangement. एक तो ये होता है सर कि आपका जब भी कोई पॉलिसी आती है और आपका जो मेजर इशू रहा है वो नैरेटिव बिल्डिंग का भी होता है, और मुझसे पहले डॉक्टर हमजा ऑल्सो स्पोक अबाउट इट. मुझे याद है कि जब सीपैक आया तो ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी भी साथ ले आया. इसी तरह जब भी कोई पॉलिसी आती है तो कोई नया नैरेटिव बिल्डअप हो जाता है और उसमें कॉन्स्पिरेसी थ्योरी आ जाती है. तो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल हमें, एंड आई विल एज ससेंट एज पॉसिबल, हमें अपनी कम्युनिकेशन को इम्प्रूव करना पड़ेगा, हमें अपने नैरेटिव को इम्प्रूव करना पड़ेगा, हमें अपनी एंगेजमेंट विद द बिजनेस कम्युनिटी को. मैं जो देखता हूँ यहाँ पे विद द इन्वेस्टर्स हियर, विद द बिजनेस कम्युनिटी हियर, बैंक्स और जो सेंट्रल बैंक है वो यूजुअली इस एक्टिविटी को ऑफ एंगेजमेंट विद द चेंबर को एज अ टिक इन द ब्लॉक लेता है. उसको उसके रियलिस्टिक एसेंस के तौर पे नहीं देता और उनकी तरफ से जो रिकमेंडेशन आती है उसको भी एज टिक इन द ब्लॉक लेता है। मैं आपको बताऊं कि बिजनेस कम्युनिटी जो है ये इस जिहाद में ऑफ इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट, पॉवर्टी एलिविएशन गवर्नमेंट के साथ खड़ी होती है, और स्पेशली इन लेस डेवलप्ड एरिया जिसको हम रिप्रेजेंट करते हैं, खैबर पख्तूनख्वा, न्यूली मर्ज्ड डिस्ट्रिक्ट, वहां पर इन चीजों को का इम्पैक्ट आता है। एंड आई वुड लाइक टू हाईलाइट ऑल्सो, जब कोविड आया एंड आई वाज क्लोजली वर्किंग विद स्टेट बैंक एंड देयर पॉलिसी एंड लॉट ऑफ गुड इनिशिएटिव्स वर टेकन, लेकिन उसकी जो कम्युनिकेशन स्ट्रेटेजी थी वो इतनी अच्छी नहीं थी। और आज भी लोग, और आज इससे पहले जो मैं बात कर रहा हूँ उसमें भी ये इशू था कि लोग वही चीजें रिपीटेडली हाईलाइट करते हैं। अगर आप कोई भी सेमिनार उठा लें इससे रिलेवेंट टॉपिक पे जो हुए हों, रिकमेंडेशन सेम होती हैं और ईयर ऑन ईयर वही रिकमेंडेशन चलती रहती हैं और उनको एड्रेस नहीं किया जाता। आई थिंक एक तो ये कि आई वुड रिकमेंड फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल कि जो एंगेजमेंट है विद द इन्वेस्टर्स जो कि आपके मुल्क में बाहर से आते हैं और आपके जो लोकल इन्वेस्टर्स एंड बिजनेस कम्युनिटी है उसको बढ़ाने की जरूरत है। आपका जो एसेंस है उसको जरूर उनको हाईलाइट करें कि व्हाट आर योर ऑब्जेक्टिव्स अबाउट दिस पॉलिसी चेंज। एक तो ये चीज है जो इन्वेस्टर्स हमारे यहाँ पे देखते हैं, देयर टू मेनी एंड टू फ्रीक्वेंट पॉलिसी चेंजेस कमिंग। एक तो आप वो काइंडली उसका कोई मॉनिटरिंग एंड इवैल्यूएशन मैकेनिज्म बना लें। ये जो आपके एमपीसी है या इसको भी, चूंकि अगेन प्रोजेक्ट मैनेजर, तो डिलीवरेबल बेस कर लें। आप किसी चेंज के अगेंस्ट को डिलीवरेबल तो सेट करें कि इससे आप अचीव क्या करना चाहते हैं, और वो डिलीवरेबल गुड और बैड आप जरूर जो कंसर्न लोग होते हैं, स्टेक होल्डर्स होते हैं, उनके साथ शेयर करें। एंड आई एश्योर यू सर, सिटिंग इन एफपीसीसीआई, कि वो आपके साथ, आप लिटिल बिट ऑफ हैंड होल्डिंग, वो आपके साथ शामिल हो जाएंगे। प्रॉब्लम ये होती है कि ना हम इन्वेस्टर्स के साथ इंगेज करते हैं, शायद एक सेट ऑफ पीपल हैं हमारे जो कि उनको हम उनको शामिल कर लेते हैं, देन वी ब्रिंग आउट दिस पॉलिसी चेंजेस। तो इसमें लार्जर डिबेट और लार्जर इंटरेक्शन की बहुत शदीद जरूरत है as far as the policy is concerned and the narrative that is built around state bank हो गया, हमजा साहब ने कहा, and we see this happening, people saying all sort of word। और प्रॉब्लम ये होती है कि जब इस तरह का कोई नैरेटिव बिल्ड किया जाता है तो उसको चैलेंज भी नहीं किया जाता, क्योंकि हम कहते हैं चलें यार खामोशी में बेहतरी है। समटाइम्स यू हैव टू एड्रेस दोस चैलेंजेस, समटाइम्स यू हैव टू मीट दिस बिजनेस कम्युनिटी एंड टॉक टू देम एंड टेल देम कि ये वजह है, इससे आपको ये फायदा हो। और मैं आपको बताऊं कि जितने भी लेस डेवलप्ड एरियाज होते हैं और स्पेशली केपी में वो ट्रेडिंग में इन्वॉल्व होते हैं, उनमें ये चेंजेस, और स्पेशली केपी इस वक्त इस टाइम को एज एन अपॉर्चुनिटी देख रहा है, बिकॉज दे हैव सफर्ड ऑफ द इनिशियल सिक्योरिटी पैराडाइम जिसमें वो रहते रहे। अब नाउ दे आर लुकिंग एट अपॉर्चुनिटीज, और ये जो चेंजेस हैं ये उनके विजन को, उनके गोल को चेंज करता है। हमारे यहाँ से बहुत सारी इन्वेस्टमेंट जो गई है वो वापस आने लगी। वी आर सेटिंग अप न्यू इंडस्ट्रियल जोन, वी आर सेटिंग अप, अब केपी इज द ओनली प्रोविंस व्हिच हैज एन इंडस्ट्रियल पॉलिसी सर, और वो पॉलिसी के अंदर जब आपने जो इनिशिएटिव्स देने होते हैं वो चेंजेस इन द मॉनेटरी एंड फिस्कल पॉलिसी, उससे इम्पैक्ट आता है। सो आई थिंक प्रोविंशियल लेवल पे डिबेट होने की जरूरत है, बोर्ड ऑफ इन्वेस्टमेंट्स, चेंबर्स, और उसके बाद एक ग्रुप जो हो उसमें प्रोविंशियल रिप्रेजेंटेशन बहुत ज्यादा हो और उसमें डिस्कशन ज्यादा हो। कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता अगर आपकी कोई पॉलिसी कुछ डिले हो जाए और उसमें आप डिस्कशन कर लें। और तीसरा ये कि आप जो कंपैरेटिव एनालिसिस करें वो अपने लोकल कल्चर को देखते हुए करें। समटाइम्स वी स्पीक, और मैं केपी से बात कर रहा हूं तो इसलिए मैं यहाँ की रिप्रेजेंटेशन करना चाहूँ। आप समटाइम्स यू स्पीक इन लैंग्वेज विच पीपल डोंट अंडरस्टैंड इन द बिजनेस कम्युनिटी है, और वो फिर ये होता है कि वो उससे एप्रीहेंशन बढ़ते हैं, उससे फ्रस्ट्रेशन बढ़ती है। तो आई थिंक इन ऑर्डर टू रिड्यूस द फ्रस्ट्रेशन ऑफ द बिजनेस कम्युनिटी, उसकी इंगेजमेंट की जरूरत है। आपकी पॉलिसी को पॉवर्टी के साथ, परचेजिंग पावर के साथ सिंक करने की जरूरत है। बट लार्जली सर मैं ये रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा आपके फोरम को, इट्स अ फैंटास्टिक फोरम, टू मैनी एंड टू फ्रीक्वेंट चेंजेस, दे हर्ट द बिजनेस कम्युनिटी, दे हर्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट। क्योंकि ये अभी हम एक्सपो में भी जब दुबई में देयर वर फ्यू कॉन्फ्रेंस वी वर डिस्कसिंग, एंड one of the areas that were highlighted by investors that you guys like to make so many changes, और ये I think it's become now a norm, और हम इससे we living with this change. आपके पास SEZ एक्ट है फॉर इंस्टेंस 2012 का, उसको सटल चेंजेस के साथ इंप्रूव करते रहें, इसी तरह ही अपनी पॉलिसीज को चेंज करते हैं और फिर इन्वेस्टमेंट को आने दें और इसको इम्पैक्ट ना हो। और अगर कोई भी चीज चेंज करनी है, आई एम स्पीकिंग ऑन बिहाफ ऑफ द इन्वेस्टर्स, कि आप कोऑपरेटिव अप्रोच रखें, स्टेक होल्डर मैनेजमेंट इससे बेहतर करें। अदरवाइज आप कितनी भी अच्छी पॉलिसी ले आएंगे, अगर आप एंगेज नहीं करेंगे तो उसके बाद हम इसी तरह की डिबेट कर रहे होंगे। और लास्टली मैं थिंक टैंक्स से भी गुजारिश करूंगा, यूजिंग जस्ट 1 more minute खाकान साहब, कि प्लीज आप जो रिसर्च करते हैं, रिपोर्ट्स करते हैं, उनको रेलेवेंट गवर्नमेंट डिपार्टमेंट से करें। मैं निबाफ में भी जाता हूँ लेक्चर देने के लिए, आपके साथ तो बहुत ज्यादा क्लोजली काम किया SDPI के साथ, आपके साथ व्हेन यू वर इन फाइनेंस। हमारे आप खुद बता दें सर कि कितनी रिपोर्ट्स आप रिसीव करते हैं फ्रॉम दीज थिंक टैंक्स एंड एकेडमिक इंस्टीट्यूशंस? कोई हार्डली एनी। आप उनको लेटर्स भी लिखते हैं। हम CPEC का लॉन्ग टर्म प्लान बना रहे थे, हमने सबको लेटर लिखा कि आप प्लीज अपनी रिकमेंडेशंस दें, अपने किसी ने नहीं दिया, उन्होंने कहा बस चाइना हमें साथ ले दें। तो बस ये आई थिंक ये अप्रोच चेंज करनी पड़ेगी और मोर जो जैसे ट्रिपल हीलेक्स भी हम एकेडमिक लैंग्वेज में कहते हैं, एकेडेमिया गवर्नमेंट पॉलिसी मेकर लिंकेजेस को डेवलप करना को, ये आप कर लें, हर पॉलिसी पे हम मेहनत करने के लिए तैयार हैं। थैंक यू सो मच।
Thank you, Dr. Daud. Very insightful points. So, एक important point I think उन्होंने ये raise किया है कि institutions like SDPI may not may be too thinly spread. So, कोई niche होनी चाहिए जिसमें हम समझें कि वो exemplary work करते हैं. So, that's something for SDPI to consider. This has come in the debate. Now, from the debate and discussion, when you're in the government sector, and I've been with the government sector for over a decade, and even now, you know, you got to remember, debate and discussion is not happening, but meetings are happening. There's a very subtle difference from being able to debate, discuss, open your mind, speak your mind, rather than just hold a meeting or to have consulted on a policy. So, of course, I think that process on the end of the government can change. Think tanks, पाकिस्तान में गवर्नमेंट का थिंक टैंक क्या है? आई थिंक प्लानिंग कमीशन एक थिंक टैंक है, स्टेट बैंक ऑफ पाकिस्तान एक थिंक टैंक है। सो इनको गवर्नमेंट के थिंक टैंक्स होना चाहिए और SDPI एंड ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस लाइक दिस को आउटसाइड थिंक टैंक्स होना चाहिए। बिल्कुल सही का, फ्रीक्वेंट चेंजेस हर्ट, इसलिए अगर आपने सुना हो तो साजिद साहब भी ये कह रहे हैं कि मीडियम टर्म गोल होना चाहिए इन्फ्लेशन का। सो जब इकोनॉमिक एजेंट्स अपने डिसीजंस कर रहे हो, अपनी प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी देख रहे हो, तो उनको नजर आए कि अगर 5-6% इन्फ्लेशन रहेगी अगले मीडियम टर्म में, तो उनका जो ROE है या उनका जो ROI है वो कैसे वर्क कर रहा है। On that good note and clearing the vision, let me ask the next panelist to clear our vision on the research on monetary policy, our vision on the aspects and impact of monetary policy on inequality, poverty, climate change, and how can we nurture this kind of research. Our next panelist, Dr. Safina Minhaj, an assistant professor of econ at the University of Karachi. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Safia Minhaj, not... Sorry,
Safia Minhaj.
No problem. Okay. Basically, I don't have so much time, so I will start very quickly. And
please take 5 minutes. That's comfortable.
Oh, 5 minutes. So quickly, I just number one. First, the main problem is that we have to point out the problems. The first problem in my thinking is we are just talking about the functioning. We understand the functioning of the central bank instead of the objective of central bank. Number one, we have to disseminate this information. Is not only the functioning of the state bank. We should, what are the main objectives and how these objective central bank is trying to achieve. Number second, now we are researchers basically should find out why either the inequality is a monetary phenomenon or not. What is the role of central bank in creating inequality among individuals, sectoral level or regional level? And thirdly, which is very important, what is happening and what is the magnitude of this inequality created by the central bank? Because central bank is creating three types of equality: wealth equality, inequality, income inequality, and consumption inequality through its financing, credit creation. Now, I'm not going in very much detail because short of time. And fourthly, now when we talk about the inflation targeting, but we are realizing inflation is continuously rising. When inflation is continuously rising, and in Pakistan, inflation and output, inflation and unemployment do not have negative relationship. There is a positive relationship. So first we have to focus, should we adopt the inflation targeting policy, or central bank is responsible to focus more on GDP target, not the growth of GDP target, because growth may be 2%, 4% or more than that, but the main problem is creation of employment. Secondly, central bank is responsible for regulation of financial sector. But what is happening in real terms? Central bank is providing consumer financing. Continuously, this consumer financing is rising in Pakistan, and now it's 77% of the total debt creation. It means now this, or mainly this consumer financing in real estate, in car financing, basically, right? Now, what is happening? That's why there is a continuous increase in the prices of housing, as well as it creates a problem of consumption inequality among them. Those who are far from getting these loans, they are suffering from poverty or inequality, especially our young generation and our pensioners or the old generation. When we talk about the regulation of financial system, this capital market is incomplete in Pakistan, because although central bank is providing microfinance schemes, it's introducing so much microfinance scheme, but I'm telling to the reality, in so many areas in Karachi, women are involved in banking sector, which is, this banking sector is not the formal banking, it's an informal banking, right? Women can take loan with another woman, 2,000 loan, out 20,000 loan for 1 year period, and she has to pay 5,700 as interest, which is more than 25%. Interest rate in the informal sector bank, informal sector is more than 25. You take the 5%, they are providing a loan from 20,000 to lakhs, so many lakhs. Same as in another area of Karachi, women is providing loans on the basis by mortgaging gold. If you provide gold, you can get loan in lakhs. So this is a point when we talk about the inflation targeting, and by the same side, there is a few creation of credit, and which is not documented. It's really a very alarming situation, and it's very continuously happening in Karachi and so many areas. I am working on that, and right now I don't have the sources of these suppliers. So secondly, when we talk, another point which I want to raise, in this way, why they are taking loans from these institutions or these informal sectors, because they are saying that there are two problems. Number one is the language barrier, and the second one is documentation. The documentation, there is a charging of documentation, and it's very expensive, and it's very difficult to read out. In this informal sector, they can take loans through the personal guarantee, right? Okay. Now, finally, one more point, what is happening? we should realize that why we are focusing on the footprints, footprints of monetary policy on the social sector, because after the great financial crisis in 2000, it was realized that there is a continuous increase when there is an increase in the stock prices and housing prices, and when these bubbles burst, who are the affectees? Basically, these are the affectees who was not the owner of them. So central bank may ease its monetary policy not in terms of getting loans or only for the financial sector, but central bank also realize that it's become because I think it's become the social, or we can say that the I'm not using the same, but the public friendly. Whenever there is announcement of federal budget, people said that this budget is public friendly or not. But when there is an announcement of monetary policy statement, everyone is quiet. Why? It's also heard as you said that thele wala, dukandar, and so many other, which are the mainly all, we are talking about the social footprints of monetary policy. तो monetary policy सबके लिए है, तो monetary policy पढ़ते हुए, announcement करते हुए लोगों को ये realize होना चाहिए कि ये हमें कैसे affect करेगी. We are not criticizing central bank policies. कहते हैं कि उसको किस तरह से वो ये चीज देखे कि how to improve its regulation, how to maintain the financial stability, how to realize those who are far from the banking sectors or credit. They include financial inclusion, how to improve the quality of the financial inclusion. We should create, give confidence to the public. If you disclose your sources of income, it's not bad for you, because we will not increase the tax rate. क्योंकि आपके पास क्या होता है, अगर मैंने अपना sources of income declare कर दिया तो इसका मतलब है मेरे पर tax लग जाएगा. उनको ये बात realize करवानी है कि अगर आप अपने sources of income declare करते हैं तो आप financial inclusion में आते हैं, और उससे फायदा ये होगा कि आपका जो asset है वो save होंगे. Thank you so much.
Dr. Saiba, what a great talk. और आपने कई इतने जरूरी points raise किए हैं कि a comment is necessary. देखिए, तीन तरह की income inequalities exist करती हैं, उन्होंने हमें बताया, wealth की, income की और consumption की. उन्होंने हमें ये भी बताया कि जो फाइनेंसिंग की फनलिंग है फ्रॉम द स्टेट बैंक ऑफ पाकिस्तान, उसको भी सोचना जो है वो बहुत जरूरी है. फिर उन्होंने इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर के बारे में बात की. पाकिस्तान में ऐसे भी एस्टिमेट्स हैं कि पाकिस्तान का इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर इज एज मच एज द फॉर्मल सेक्टर एग्जिस्ट्स. और उन्होंने बताया कि तकरीबन 2% महाना, यानी कि अगर आप 10 लाख का लोन अभी लें तो 4 साल में आप 20 लाख रुपए वापस करेंगे, जो इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर में इस वक्त चल रहा है. और ये अब नहीं चल रहा, जब मैं छोटा सा था तब से लेके अब तक मैं यही सुन रहा हूँ. सो इट्स गुड, बीन गुड 20-25 years. बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बात उन्होंने ये की कि हम जैसे पढ़े लिखे लोगों के लिए तो शायद ये लगता हो, और जो इस काम में इन्वॉल्व है, कि लैंग्वेज बैरियर नहीं है अंडरस्टैंड करने के लिए उन फॉर्म्स को, उस डॉक्यूमेंटेशन को समझने के लिए डिफिकल्टी नहीं है, पर एक आम इंसान के लिए. इसीलिए साहिद साहब, मैं आपको गुजारिश करूंगा कि ऑस्ट्रेलिया, जहां पे बहुत वक्त मैंने गुजारा, वहां पे एडवाइजरी सर्विस जो है वो एक मेन चीज है. आप जब फाइनेंशियल इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स को टच करते हैं तो यू गो थ्रू एन एडवाइजर, and that is a very very important role completely missing. डॉक्टर साहब, बहुत ही ये इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट आपने रेज किया. और फिर आपने ये रेज किया कि एमपीएस को, मैं बड़ा इंट्रीग हुआ जब आपने कहा हम हमेशा बजट करते थे, 11-12 बजट किए हुकूमत के साथ, यार ये मेक श्योर कि ये ऐसे लगे कि ये पब्लिक फ्रेंडली बजट है. तो क्या हमें एमपीएस को भी ऐसे ही सोचना चाहिए? वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. On that, I come to my next participant, an old friend from the government times when he was at the Planning Commission, now is a known economist, a public finance expert, currently is a joint executive director at the SDPI. He will share a video message with us as he's busy arranging this whole great series of seminars that SDPI is doing, for his remarks on the major monetary policy reforms agenda in Pakistan and highlighting the key reforms, and also how can the engagement of the SPP be increased with other institutions, whether academic or think tanks. So Dr. Vaqar's Ahmed's address now.
Let me start by thanking our partners, FES, for this collaboration on this very important subject today. I'm grateful to the SDPI team under the leadership of Dr. Sajid Amin for taking this very important subject forward. And really grateful to Dr. Hafiz Pasha, Dr. Jochen Hippler for the thought leadership that they have provided in the overall understanding of this subject. And I think I must also acknowledge here the collaboration in this thought process from Dr. Raza Bakir and his team at the central bank, who have been very open to discuss this subject with SDPI and partners. Let me just offer a couple of thoughts here for our esteemed audience and probably have their inputs going forward. First is that as we see, evaluation of monetary policies is probably one of the most important tasks that countries should do, because monetary policies have a direct bearing on the lives of people. But this evaluation cannot be done by central banks alone. And there's a role for, of course, the government, the parliament, the civil society, for which perhaps the public-private dialogue is very important, and monetary policy should become part of the mainstream public-private dialogue in the country. So what FES and SDPI have actually started as a very small effort, one would really like to see that it should culminate into very tangible and more frequent knowledge products coming out for public knowledge. For example, we have been thinking about an annual monetary policy conference, which should take place in independent space, in collaboration with the central bank, in collaboration with the finance ministry. We have been also thinking about an annual monetary policy report, which should come out in independent space. It should be an independent evaluation of the social footprint of monetary policy in Pakistan. And the reason why, the motivation is that there is a need to place an agenda for action research on social implications of monetary policy, and really enable our parliamentarians to discuss this subject more, discuss the social footprint more on the floor of the parliament. One must look into the legislation that governs banks and the policy, and analyze what are the who are the excluded groups in those policies, and it's about an agenda of political economy that has to be really understood here. I would also like to stress upon the fact that there's been a lot of debate around the roles, various roles of the central bank around price stability, around revival of growth, but very less so around the role which central banks could play in mitigating the various forms of inequalities which have come around in the wake of COVID-19. And this is a subject which was around for long, but really central banks, and not just putting Pakistan's central bank on the spot, the central banks across the globe have really not moved into this space, or not assumed that responsibility where, for example, they were answerable or they were accountable for mitigation of horizontal and vertical inequalities. But now, of course, there is national and international evidence which suggests that at various levels, central banks have a role to play beyond, of course, price stability and growth, and really focusing on how price stability can also have its linkages with various forms of inequalities. Now, price stability, of course, improves social welfare, but the ultimate impact depends on tools and approaches to achieve that price stability and which economic agents are impacted by those approaches. We cannot do evidence-based policy without evidence, of course, and the need for more discourse based on behavioral macroeconomics and on action research is needed. And this is perhaps, I believe, that central bank has to be a partner with SDPI and FES for this action research. And I think it's also important that one has to look into the mandate of something which is driven by the mandate of the Monetary and Fiscal Policy Board, which of course is driven by the Finance Division. And out of all the political economy around this subject, I believe that there is a role for this board to be more open now. We would like to see a more broad-based representation at this board, more inclusive representation at this board. There are, of course, National Assembly and Senate standing committees which can organize themselves better to play that role of social accountability around monetary policies. And in case these committees lack capabilities, technical capabilities, of course, I'm certain that they're good at looking at these affairs through a political lens. But if the committees lack technical capabilities, then perhaps this is where think tanks can be invited to really provide independent feedback on the central bank's actions, monetary policy directions going forward. I also think that the Monetary Policy Board should also extend its mandate, and they should be very open to meeting the civil society on a very frequent basis. We only hear about the Monetary Policy Board and their meetings once, of course, the monetary policy is supposed to be announced, which is okay. But I think taking inputs from the grassroots is equally important. They need to meet SMEs, they need to meet even their constituents in commercial banking sector, investment banking sectors, marginalized communities, for example, women businesses. Because unless the Monetary Policy Committee meets these excluded groups more often, their own discussion in the Monetary Policy Board would really remain inconclusive, which could be a cause of concern. And then the entire effort around improving the social footprint of monetary policy would remain really half-hearted. Next, I also feel that it's not just in the domain of policy think tanks to take this forward alone. The social footprint of monetary policy has to be more widely researched upon by the academia. And really, I see a lot of good local academia, Pakistani universities doing very good work in the monetary policy area. But when it comes to the social and welfare implications of monetary policy, that is where I would really like to invite our local universities to really buckle up and give us some good, recent, current evidence, wherein, for example, we can also sort of take that research and really ensure that some of that research becomes part of the actions of.
If I may request कि हम इसको fast forward कर दें ताकि हम Dr. Alia को ले सकें. We are almost out of time. अब बस end कर दें please इनको.
This aspect, so we'll be doing justice with the pandemic or national emergencies. Thank you.
Khaqan,
Ji, sir.
I suppose I am the chairman of the proceedings. So
Sir.
if you can allow me 2-3 minutes after Dr. Alia,
Certainly.
I would certainly appreciate that.
We would, sir. We would. Let me now request in the end, बहुत important बातें की हैं डॉक्टर वकार ने, मैं समअप नहीं करूंगा, बट उन्होंने पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमी की बात किया. देखें, इम्प्लीमेंटेशन इन पाकिस्तान इज अ मैटर, जब तक आप पार्लियामेंटेरियंस को और लेजिस्लेटिव प्रोसेस को इन्वॉल्व नहीं करेंगे, इम्प्लीमेंटेशन नहीं होगी. तो उनको साथ लेके चलना है. अब मैं रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि इस सारे जो हमारे रिमार्क्स थे हमारे एक्सपर्ट्स के, उसके लिए डॉक्टर आलिया हाशमी खान हमें जरा कंक्लूडिंग रिमार्क्स दें, प्लीज 5 to 7 minutes. Dr. Alia is a former member of the Monetary Policy Committee. I think the only lady member who has been on the committee. He's been on the EAC with us when I was there also. She's a former professor, School of Economics, Quaid-e-Azam University. A very enthusiastic participant. The floor is yours, Dr. Alia.
Thank you. At the outset, I would like to thank FES and SDPI, both institutions which are very close to my heart, for engaging me in this very, very important project, which has culminated in a very high quality publication that I would request all of the students who are sitting here to take a copy with them and read through, because today we are talking about broadening the scope and the understanding of monetary policy. And monetary policy actually has been a matter of, I should say, destiny for me, because when I joined the Quaid-e-Azam University about 35 years ago, I was asked to teach the specialization of monetary theory and monetary policy, because there was no teacher available to teach that. And since I had been fortunate in getting a good education of monetary economics at Quaid-e-Azam University before my PhD, I was very enthusiastic about delivering the theory and the policy of monetary economics. And I'm very, I guess, proud today to see one of my students, Dr. Hamza, who studied monetary policy from me, being such an eloquent speaker on monetary policy. So I think that I'm not going to definitely attempt to summarize what has been said. I will just try to focus on some issues which I think are very important at the moment because of the impending legislation regarding the independence of the State Bank of Pakistan, and the focus on price stability, which is linked with that legislation, and of course the accountability and the transparency of monetary policy actions, which are also embedded in the State Bank of Pakistan Amendment 2021. And I would also request that instead of shunning the idea that, you know, this is an amendment that is being pushed down our throats because of IMF conditionalities, let us try to understand what Pakistan can manage to get out of this amendment. And for that, I would also request the audience to study the amendment before forming their opinions regarding whether, you know, it should be passed or not passed. Now, as very correctly pointed out by my student, Dr. Hamza, the main aim of monetary policy as part of a set of economic policies which are for the welfare enhancement of the general public of any country. Monetary policy supports this broader welfare objective through promotion of price stability, which has been repeatedly mentioned in this discourse today, is low and stable inflation. Now, being a member of the Monetary Policy Committee, I would like to point out that I was always very curious about a debate on the transmission mechanism of monetary policy. That is, what are the channels through which monetary policy impacts the general public? And I think this issue of the social footprint of monetary policy is very, very deeply linked with the transmission mechanism of monetary policy. And I am just going to talk about one channel, because I think other speakers have talked about the credit channel, the asset price channel. The channel that is now going to become very important is that of the inflation expectations, which are going to be now, they have always been linked with monetary policy actions, but we have not really focused on that channel very much in terms of a academic discourse, and also at the Monetary Policy Committee level. And why is inflation management so important? Because the state bank is responsible for anchoring inflation expectations. Volatile inflation is anti-growth. It hurts the firms and the households, and therefore it is important to understand how state bank is trying to control and stabilize inflation. And it also means that the whole research setup of the state bank now will have to empirically estimate the impact of, and if it's not geared to at the moment, I'm sure they have the capacity to do it. It just requires a shift in focus, especially with this debate of the social impacts of monetary policy, to periodically update the transmission mechanism empirically. And also, when I used to teach monetary policy, there was this lambda that we were always concerned about, and that is the gaps in monetary policy or the speed of adjustment of monetary policy. Why don't we bring in these concepts within the wider discourse of monetary policy and tie them to the social impacts that monetary policy has? I mean, it's not to say that monetary policy has not been having impacts. It's just that we were not really at the state bank level trying to measure and assess those impacts to the extent that is being recommended now, especially after this very important study. And there has been a lot of talk about improving the communication of the policy stance of monetary policy. I have witnessed the preparation of the monetary policy statement for 3 years when I was member of the Monetary Policy Committee. And I think that it is a very, very technical and dry way of putting across the stance of monetary policy. I think we need to contextualize the monetary policy statement with a vision that monetary policy is also one of, in a set of policies that impacts the welfare of the public of Pakistan. And by public, I mean the common persons. I am deliberately not saying common man because I think there is now a time to recognize that the other half of the population also matters even in the discussions of very powerful policy discourses like monetary policy. And of course, it goes without saying there is enough research evidence that diversity and inclusivity is now an economic issue. It is not a social issue alone, it is also an economic issue. The boards which are diverse and inclusive reach conclusions and policy consensus on policies that are more appealing to the welfare needs of the public, and we need to make the state bank policy decision forums. Even the state bank board currently has no female member. The monetary policy committee has no female member, and there has to be obviously mentoring and grooming of people, of women especially, to act in these positions. And also, I would say that typically females always took my course of monetary policy with a lot of interest, but when it came to making career choices, they did not really follow. Yes, I'm winding up. Yes, I was just sensitive to the fact that we have a lot of young people listening in to our discussion, and some of the messages should go across to the youth also, so that when they engage in their future career paths, and also when they make decisions about research agendas to pursue, they should be cognizant of this. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to voice my opinion on this platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sahiba. Over to you, Dr. Pasha, for your concluding remarks.
I must confess that it has been a remarkably rich and very useful discussion on the social imprint of monetary policy, and would like to just to make very quickly a few points, and in more or less in terms of summarizing some of the findings. The first thing is, let me on record say that there is a degree of great disappointment about the non-participation of any officials, however senior, from the State Bank of Pakistan. This is a very unfortunate reflection of the lack of openness of that institution. The governor was in fact expected to make a statement, which did not happen. So I must admit to a degree of disappointment. The other point is a very important observation which most speakers have made, which is on the need for monetary policy to primarily focus on low and stable inflation. I completely agree with this, but my problem is that Pakistan's inflation historically, a very large component, and currently about 60 to 70% of the inflation is imported inflation. How do you manage to have low and stable inflation in the presence of relatively high levels of imported inflation? The other issue which has come up is the need to understand that in the process of achieving low and stable inflation, we should not end up unduly sacrificing the goal of a higher GDP. And that is precisely the reason why we feel that the decision on inflation target must rest with a body which has the responsibility of focusing on the multiple dimensions of development in Pakistan. And that, therefore, to me, is the National Economic Council, which is headed by the Honorable Prime Minister and as the chief ministers of the 4 provinces, finance ministers of the 4 provinces, and so on. So we need to ensure that that happens. And let me, more or less in conclusion, also say that you will be surprised to know that there used to be a publication called Inflation Monitor produced by the State Bank of Pakistan. It still is produced, but 2 interesting deletions have taken place in recent months. One, the Inflation Monitor used to try and measure the impact of inflation by income group, by income quintiles, more or less. That has disappeared. Second, the Inflation Monitor used to give us the inflation rate in each city of Pakistan, and that would give us an indication where the markets are beginning to flounder. That again has vanished. May I request the State Bank of Pakistan to at least begin to go back to indicating the differential impact of inflation, both by income as well as by location. That is very important. And finally, measurement of inflation. With all due respects, the rate of inflation measured by the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics is full of technical shortcomings. I can spend the whole day telling you what those problems are. And the amazing fact that 51 items, which are the basic items, the inflation rate in food, according to the SPI, is close to 15%, whereas according to the PBS, it is hardly 10%, doesn't make any sense. There are all kinds of serious problems in capturing administered prices. There are problems, particularly with the largest single item in the price index, which is the housing rent. Believe it or not, we are being told that housing rents are rising by 6% only. Wow. When there is a growing shortage of housing in Pakistan of over 4 million housing units. So issues of measurement, I'm ending on those issues because that is one very clear area of research for specialized think tanks. But let me conclude by thanking you for doing a super job and thanking the speakers. And in particular, in conclusion, I want to place on record our deep appreciation of the support from the Frederick Ebert Stiftung Foundation and the SDPI's outstanding team led by Dr. Sajid. Thank you all, and I hope that we can meet once again and have fruitful discussions. And before I conclude, I just finally want to say one thing, please. Can we convene an event the moment the new legislation on the State Bank of Pakistan is placed before the Parliament? Could we as a group meet once again and look at the individual items in the amendment agenda and formulate our combined opinion? And I will ensure you that this will get to the Finance Committee of the Parliament. Thank you all very much.
इतनी खूबसूरत बातें करते हैं कि दिल चाहता है सुनते ही रहें. So all the participants, what a great seminar. I hope you enjoyed it. It was very educative for all of us. Many of the friends met again. We continue to do this. Thank you SDPI for such a great conference. Khuda Hafiz. Have an enjoyable lunch.
Khuda Hafiz. Thank you so much.